Welcome to the Twin Bill Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Bolohan. This week we have something a little different for you. Our fiction editor, Francois Bereaud, has a short story collection coming out next month. So we talked with him about his writing and baseball career, editing at the Twin Bill, and his book, San Diego Stories. I had a great time catching up with him, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Francois. How you doing today?
I am great.
So you have been our fiction editor now. You started earlier this year. I believe it was the opening day issue was the first issue.
Through 2 issues now.
2 issues now. Before we talk about what that's like, give me a little background on your history as a baseball fan, player. What does baseball mean to you in your life?
Well, that's sort of funny. In my work life, I am a math teacher, which surprises people. I've been a high school math teacher educator for 35 years. I teach community college, calculus and statistics. That relates to baseball because I was always fairly adept mathematically and with numbers. And so it sort of drew me as a kid to statistics. I'm probably not the only nerd who can say this, but I used to read the baseball encyclopedia. Right. And I got to a point where I could open the page and guess, random players' batting average within, 5 points. Unfortunately, I was a terrible player. I played 3 seasons of Little League. I think I got averaged about 1 hit a season. The last season I played on an excellent team. I think we won every game by an average score of like 11-1. It was a terrible experience. I was like the put him in the 5th inning in right field, maybe not getting that bat kind of guy. The highlight of the year was, or the low light, I should say, was we were pitching a no-hitter. Our guy was pitching a no-hitter, and of course I was in right field. It was the first ball hit to me all season, right? Probably game 12 or something. And of course I missed it, but I didn't make an error, right? I didn't touch it, so it went for a hit, and I got all this shit for breaking up the no-hitter, right? Defensively breaking up the no-hitter. So that drove me out of baseball. It was a really negative experience. The coach was not nice. And I just tried a bunch of other sports, none of which I was great at, but at least they were a little better experience than baseball. And then I didn't, and this is in, what I wrote in the first piece in the Twin Bill, I didn't think about baseball much until my oldest son was 10 years old. And I had steered him towards soccer. I had which I coached. I had steered him towards basketball because he was sort of a big, tall kid. And at 10 years old, he said, I think I want to play baseball. Of course, my first reaction was like, oh, no. And I also knew at this point, we were in Southern California. He had been born in upstate New York, which is not a big base, a great baseball place, but Southern California is, right? People play 12 months here. And I was very worried that, he was going to jump in. He wasn't particularly good at the other sports. And he was going to jump into this thing, and he got really into it, and, he would just be crushed. The opposite happened. He played through college. And it just was amazing as a parent to see my child get so immersed in this. And it took him from a kid to a man. It's still, he's partially working in baseball now. I know it's always going to be a part of his life. And to see the relationships, whether it's with teammates or coaches, and it got him to, community college. It got him to 4-year college, right? That was his job out of college for multiple years.
Yeah.
So seeing that side of it as a parent, I kind of fell in love with it again in a different way. The first piece, that I wrote, the Twin Bill, was kind of, was called A Career, based on his career in baseball.
Yeah. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Yeah. Are you a Padres fan? Do you get to out to many games these days?
I haven't in the last couple of years. He's a huge Padres fan. And I remember one year for his birthday, I offered him we could get 2 or 3 tickets, really nice, or we could do this 10-pack. He had to think about the economics. I think he chose the 10-pack of cheaper seats, but he got to go more. And then I distinctly remember when he was 14 or 15, and he looked at me and he's like, Dad, you don't have to go with me anymore. It's like both happy and a little hurt, right? But at that point, he was probably 6 feet tall and, weighed the same as I do. I'm like, okay, if you go with 3 friends, I think you'll be fine.
Yeah.
So I sort of fair weather, but yes, I do root for the Padres.
Yeah.
He's a big Padres guy.
So how does a math professor end up writing fiction, nonfiction?
I'm not a mathematician. I'm not I'm a very good math teacher. I love math, but my father was a literature person. My mom is a huge reader. I also always loved books and loved reading. In college, I wasn't officially an English minor, but I took a good number of English courses. So I almost could have gone either way, But people think it's very strange, right? That
it's certainly unexpected. Yeah.
Right, unexpected. Yeah. And I've just always had both of those loves. But finally pushed myself, always thought about writing, did a little bit here and there, and then pushed myself to get a master's, an MFA in 2011. Went back to school and did it. And that really, it was great because it just forced me to write. I had these classes and the expectation that I would write stuff, and I did, and it's carried through.
So I did want to go back and talk about the pieces you've written for us. You mentioned a career, which we nominated for the Pushcart in 2021. I don't know if you've had this experience. I always have this experience when I'm editing. And at the time, I was editing the CNF. And I remember getting your piece. And I can remember I was at my parents' house. I was in the hammock in my parents' backyard. And I remember opening up the piece and be like, wow. This is exactly what I want the twin bill to be. It just blew me away, and it was actually pretty cool because it was kind of a collaborative piece with your son. What do you remember about writing that piece, and how did that all come together?
Well, so his last college baseball game, and I'll express a regret here. I didn't go to it. It was finals week, and as a dedicated math professor, it's a very stressful time for my students. They want to see us. The playoffs were in Stockton, California, which is not easy to get to from San Diego. And it was sort of a round robin. Anyway, they were down to the last game. They had to win to move forward, and they were up. It was horrific. They were up like 11-1. My son was playing designated hitter as opposed to first base because the designated hitter had been very whiny. I think that was a mistake from the manager. And then the wheels fell off. And they lost 13-11. I mean, in the last 2 innings, they gave up 10 runs. And I always thought, well, maybe if he'd been at first base to help calm those pitchers down, because he'd been there all season. But be that as it may, right? And so I was watching it on some streaming thing. I'm not on Instagram, but he must have sent it to me. So he wrote this Instagram post within a half hour. And I just knew how hard it had to be for him, right? Last game, you're way up, you lose, and it was it. And so he wrote this, and I was just very moved because in that reflection, instead of being angry, he was grateful. He has a line in there about, I can't believe people would come out and watch me play a game, over all these years, from little league through high school, through club, through college. And it just stuck. And that was 2018 when we graduated from college. And I don't know, 2 or 3 years later, I just decided to write around that piece, right? So I wrote an introduction to that piece, and then I wrote a conclusion of that piece, the parent part of his career, right? Partially what I went through, all those games and years.
Did Nick know you were doing this?
I don't think so. I think I don't remember exactly. I probably told him after the fact. Mm-hmm. I don't think it took me particularly long, right? Because it was so heartfelt and so, even though I didn't do it right at that moment, So that's how that one came about, and it's still one of the, it's one of those very emotional pieces, right?
It's fantastic. You published 2 other pieces here. There was a stretch where we were trying to do almost like themed issues, and the thing I've learned is it just doesn't really work. People will write whatever they want to write, but we wanted to do an issue on Nolan Ryan, Ernie Banks, and Jackie Robinson's birthday on January. Oh gosh, I should know this. January 30th or 31st. I'm going to edit the one that it isn't out there, and it'll sound right.
I want to say 30th.
Who knows? I think it's the 30th. I think it's the 30th. Yeah, geez. And so we asked for pieces specifically about that, and of course, somehow I think that issue we ended up publishing 2 Ricky Henderson pieces. So just, and we just kind of learned it's like we get what we get, and we can't be too picky. But you actually did sort of take the call on that one, and you actually did write a piece, which was also fantastic. Do you remember anything about that one?
Well, I figured there's been a lot written about Jackie Robinson, right?
Yeah.
Rightly so.
Yeah.
And I couldn't
Yes.
see what I could possibly add to that. And then I did a little bit of geeky research. Being a fan, obviously, I knew about Ernie Banks and Nolan Ryan. And Banks' career ended as Ryan's was starting, right? And it turned out that they faced each other 2 different times. And I was able to get that box score, right? Which is not that hard, but I didn't know that was that available. It was just sort of fun to imagine, what it might have been like.
Yeah.
I mean, one player knowing, okay, I'm facing a legend. The other player, I'm facing a young guy who throws very hard, and who knows where that was going to head. So that was just a lot of sort of fun to research that and imagine, what might have been going through either of their heads.
And then the next year, the very first year that we held the contest, you wrote a fiction piece for the Sid Finch Prize. And I remember Brian, who was the fiction editor before you. We were so torn between you and the eventual winner. I think we ended up sending it to the board members to pick because we couldn't decide. It was just, they were both so well done. But you wrote we decided is Paul Giannakis, what Paul Giannakis could see. I think that's what we decided on, the pronunciation. What was that like, writing baseball fiction, writing that piece specifically?
Well, the genesis of that piece came from my former next door neighbor, whose name was Paul, and who told me the opening story. He played up to AAA with Pawtucket, and he went to spring training. And I pictured this so vividly in my mind. He's at spring training with Ted Williams, right? Arguably the best hitter ever, telling these guys they got to follow the laces, right? And he was a scrappy guy, Paul. He went to high school in Northern California. He wrote a letter to a junior college coach in Southern California, who wrote back and said, "Sure, you want to come, we'll see." He then wrote a letter to, I think, the University of Florida. Right, this is a letter writing time. Walked on there, played in the College World Series, right? So just sort of inculcated his way into different teams, and then ends up in spring training with Ted Williams and says to Ted Williams, "No one can do that. You're the only human that's ever been able to see the laces of the ball." And then he told me, I can't remember how much was in the story because I haven't looked at it in a while. He played a couple years at Pawtucket and realized he wasn't going to go any further, right? Whatever he was, 5'10", 165 pounds, he'd maxed out. But he further told me that every job he ever got was related to baseball. And he quit because he realized he could make more money doing sales or something and sporting goods. So I actually haven't looked at that story in a while, but that was the genesis of it, right? And different pieces of his life.
I mean, you've written other fiction pieces. Is there anything particularly challenging about writing baseball fiction as opposed to any other genre or type of fiction you find?
That's a good question. I think with baseball, and this probably can transition into editing as well, how much in the weeds one might want to go as the writer. I think that we and you, prior to when I was on the team, have done a really good job of generally selecting stories that don't do that, right? That are going to appeal to someone who could know almost nothing about baseball, right? Because the stories are really about humans. So I think that's the tricky part, right? Yet on the other hand, if someone does choose to write about baseball, it's probably they like it, and so there is some level of getting into the weeds. But it's not a play-by-play, right? No one wants to read.
When people get bogged down in the play-by-play, like this pitch, and then it was outside, and the next pitch was up, and a foul ball, and it's like, okay, yeah, we get it. Like we love baseball. We understand sequencing of pitches and stuff, but it's like, we want the story. We want like the human aspect of it there. And there's a time and a place, I think, for sure, for things like that. It's almost like it when you see it. It's like, oh, this is too much. So you're going too far in one direction, I think.
Well, I have actually, and I'm trying to remember now on the first piece, I have checked with Nick, my son, on a couple of baseball lines, things that I'm not like throwing behind the runner. And I've checked with him, like, is that something that's said in baseball, right? And I'll throw a line like that in, but the reader doesn't get that. It doesn't matter, right? The baseball purist might appreciate that, and the reader doesn't get it, can move on with the story. Right?
Sure.
We don't want expository text, I don't think, about the pros and cons of that, because that'll lose, right, 99% of the readers. So.
Yeah. So you've been editing for a while now, and you joined our team earlier this year. I was thrilled you agreed. You were my
honored.
first choice. What has been your process like editing here at the Twin Bill?
Oh, it's been wonderful. It's been challenging in that where I edited before, we published a lot more. And so I could more or less, if I liked a piece, we could run it.
Yeah.
Right. Here, I want to say for the first 2 issues, I think we published 4 fictional pieces in each, and there was a good 30 some, right? So 1 out of 8. And there were certainly pieces that we said no to that I thought were very good, right? That's been one challenge, right?
Yeah.
And, it helps that I, as a writer, have probably 500 rejections under my belt, right? So if you're going to get into this, you have to be prepared for that. And that doesn't mean that I don't take it lightly, right? I know that someone sent their work and that they're proud of it, and maybe they've worked extremely hard on it, and that might feel crappy to them, right? To get a no, even if I try to be very supportive, but it is part of the writing life. But that's certainly been one challenge, right?
When do you read the pieces? Do you read them as they come in? Do you kind of save them all at once? What is that process like from when, say, you get a short story until publication?
For the first issue, I think I joined a little bit late in the game.
You did.
There were a bunch of pieces from the contest, I think.
Oh my gosh. Yeah,
right,
you had like 40
there was a
or 50 pieces.
Pile.
Yeah.
So I read through them pretty quickly. For the second issue, I did mostly as they came in. I haven't touched the World Series yet.
Mm-hmm.
What I like to do is I'll read a piece, and there's, you describe it in your hammock. Sometimes something just really socks you in a great way, right? And then there are other pieces that, don't feel like a fit. And then there's sort of that third category of maybe I'm not sure, right? So I'll sort of make my notes on that. Anything, even if it's something that I love, I do want to reread it, right? I want to make sure that, I love it again. And often I love it more, actually, because you miss, in great writing, you're not going to get it all the first time, right? Even if it's just an 8-page story or something.
Yeah.
So, I just sort of make notes, and there's ones on the fence that I'll read, or at least, read twice and maybe scan a couple more times when it, if I just am not sure about it, or maybe I'm missing something.
Yeah. Do you give a lot of edits?
I do a fair amount. In fact, we have there'll be a piece for the World Series that I thought was excellent, but that I really felt had a few holes or things that needed to be fixed. And so I communicated with the author, and author was fine with that. And so we've gone through that, and it's all ready to go. But it was a little more than usual, right? A couple things that didn't make sense in my mind. For the other pieces that I've accepted them straight up and then done some editing on Google Docs. And most, if it's a typo, obviously, I just fix it. And there have been a few places, almost all of my suggestions have been taken. And if they're not, that's fine too, right? I don't.
Yeah. Is there anything you look for as an editor in a piece?
I'm still somewhat of a traditionalist. I like a beginning, a middle, and an end. I have almost as an aside, I have kind of a conflicted relationship with flash fiction, even though I've written some. Sometimes I don't understand it, or it's too fast. And then there are some masterful writers whose language is so amazing that if I don't get the full story, it's worthy. And then there are people that can somehow, in 500 words, get you a whole story.
Yeah.
That said, I do really like to see some character development. I also like to see, and this was something that my grad school advisor said, show me something I've never seen before. So we published that piece, Hot Dogs Make Great Pillows.
Right.
And there's, maybe I'm spoiling it, but anyone listening to this should go back and read that. But there's a pretty amazing scene with the hot dog vendor, who's, an 18 or 19-year-old
unexpected
kid. Yes, yeah. Unexpected, right? Did not show up to work that day with what happened. And so, that, I think that piece was pretty popular, as I remember you saying. But she just gave us that scene alone. I was like, okay, we got to run that, right? Other people have to see that image that I got to see. So if you can, if a writer can just give us something so extraordinary, unusual, that that's a plus, right? I love that. I mean, we all have our biases, right? And I mentioned that, my re-entry into baseball came through my son. And I was looking at some of the fiction pieces before this interview that I've chosen, and a number of them have been family pieces. I mean, in fact, the conceit of the Pillows piece, right, is a woman going to a baseball game because her mother, which is a little bit unusual, right, relative to the stereotype. Her mother is a huge Mets fan, right? She doesn't particularly care about baseball. But we had another really lovely father, the EFIS one, really great father-daughter piece, right? And baseball is just a great setting, right? Because the game itself, although we are baseball fans, is pretty darn slow. Right? So there's a lot that can happen, right? Whether it's between every pitch or between innings, or it's sort of people being at a baseball game. There's maybe more that can happen than at a game that's a little faster paced, where you're generally eyes on the field more than at, say, baseball, right?
I always say that, when you go to a baseball game, all 40,000 people in the stands see the same baseball game, but there are 40,000 stories about what happened at that baseball game.
Right.
And those are the things that appeal to me less so than just kind of, the play-by-play of the game that everyone saw. It's like, no, I want to know what you saw.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any tips for writers for submitting to you?
It surprised me, right? Give me something unusual.
Yeah.
It's almost like look at what we publish and do something different, right? We do have a recent father-daughter story that was lovely. It doesn't mean we can't have another one, right? Or mother-daughter story, but on the other hand, maybe send me something different if you can come up with that, right?
I think my favorite fiction piece that we ever published, this was before you were editing here, it was Ricky Henderson Sits by a Lake, and it was just a story, maybe it's 1,100 words or so, maybe 1,000 words, maybe I think it might have been the shortest fiction piece we've ever published. It was about Ricky Henderson just driving to a lake after he set the all-time stolen base record, and it's so unexpected
one.
and so
Is that Lake Merritt in Oakland? Yeah, I remember. Yes, that was a great story.
It was a great little piece, and it's always stuck with me as sort of like, oh wow, I didn't know that we could do stuff like this, and we can, and I think that's one of the fun things about editing is like we kind of have something in mind for what we're going to do, but then if something comes along that we are not expecting, it's like, who says we can't do this? We're in charge. We can do something like this. We can publish this, or we can publish something short or something long. I mean, I know you for example, you've Brian was pretty strict about 3,000 words for the pieces, and just simply for reading time. And you are open to longer pieces. I think we have 5,000 words.
I mean, if it was 5,400, I would be fine with it if it was compelling, right?
Yeah,
I do feel like it's, as someone who's published a lot, I don't love long pieces online. I just feel like there's a less probability of them getting read.
It's hard.
Get their hand in a print journal. Less people get their hands on a print journal, right? So it's kind of the constant push pull.
Yeah.
But you made me think of this one of the stories we just published, Glimmering, right, where essentially nothing happens. Right? And I say that in the most complimentary fashion, right? Because she pulled that off. Just a guy sitting on the bench thinking about all his years in baseball, but it was just a sort of magical, I thought.
Yeah,
from the present day piece. Over, how many 50 years of his life, really, his entire life. So I would encourage writers to kind of look at some of the pieces we've published, but also not be afraid to set out and just unusual. That said, I've seen a couple pieces where the baseball I thought was too tangential. Like if you had substituted the word soccer for the word baseball, the story would have been just as good, and it maybe was an excellent story, but I do feel like there has to be something, some quality of baseball that comes through, that some unique quality of baseball, right?
I always struggle with that too. Like we're a baseball literary publication. What makes a story a baseball story? And I've never had a great answer for it. I always think it should be somehow instrumental to what is happening, but it doesn't have to be about baseball, but there
No,
needs to be
but
something
maybe
that
it's
really,
sensory, right? Maybe it's the smell of the pine tar or the crackling of the sunflower seeds, right? And maybe the rest of it, I don't know. Yeah, it's you sort of know it when you see it, I guess, right?
Exactly.
Well, the other thing I want to say about the twin bill, the art piece, is really a special piece. The piece that went with the Paul Giannakis story I have framed.
Jason did that one, right? I think Jason did that.
Yeah. So for people who don't know, right, for every piece that we accept, right, whether it's whatever the genre is, we commission an original piece of art to go with it, and that's just such a lovely pairing, right? And it's a real honor as a writer, right, when that happened to me, as someone who submitted to the twin bill, right, to get those pieces. It's really beautiful, and so that's another plug for what we do and how special that is.
How do you think that editing has that in any way influenced your own writing now?
It's a funny thing. I've done a lot less writing since I've edited, so there's there's the time factor.
Well,
occasionally there's the I'm so impressed with what I've read that it intimidates my own writing, but mostly it inspires. Just there's so many people. I knew nothing about the indie lit world, say 4 years ago, right? And now I think I know a fair amount about it. And there's just so much great writing out there, whether it's at our literary journal, which is pretty niche, right? Or, others which are maybe a little better known, but there are just so many, right? And you open almost any one, whether it's print or online, and you find some gem, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it certainly, I think it's inspired me, and then allowed me to form relationships as well with writers, which has been great.
I was gonna say you really have built a community, or now I feel like you're part of a community with these other indie writers on Twitter specifically. You've really been very active in not only promoting your work but other people's work, which is just an amazing thing. How did that come about? When did this start for you?
Well, it goes back to my son Nick, right, a baseball player. We had a little family get together. I want to say it was 2021. It was sort of when first, post vaccination. Okay, maybe we can get a Airbnb, right, and be together and live through that. But I was talking with him, and he basically said, he's on Padres Twitter, right, and he's made a lot of friends, and he's probably gotten 50 baseball tickets out of Padres Twitter.
Oh, wow.
Right? Because, people know him and like him, and I got an extra ticket tonight, kind of thing. And so he said, well, I don't know anything about writing, but it's probably the same kind of thing. So I remember when we set up the account, and he showed me, he was my first follower, showed me how to send a tweet. And it just really grew from there. And then, I don't know, I tweeted a few people's stories, and it made them really happy, right? I was like, okay, well, it doesn't take that much effort. And so, as writers, especially as indie writers, we want readers. So that just became kind of my ethos. I don't really have I try to do a couple a day. I don't always get that, but I really try to support writers that I admire. I never tweet something that I don't like.
Yeah.
So it's always genuine. And I'll also try to go out of my way to find people maybe who haven't gotten as much attention as others.
You yourself have a book coming out September 21st, I believe, is the launch here.
It is
San Diego Stories. What can you tell me about that?
Whew. Well, it's a dream, right? I mean, I actually have that in my bio, and I know that sounds pretty cliche, but as someone who, I really did grow up as a big reader of all kinds of things. And again, my dad was a literature professor, so very fortunate I have lots of books in the home. But the idea that my name is going to be on a full book is really a dream. The particular collection is actually the third full manual. I've written a novel and another collection, so this is my third, but my first one to get published. I didn't really set out to write it. I wrote a number of stories. One story in it, my first publication in the literary journal. It's the first chapter of my novel. There's 12 stories in one novella, so I had written, 2/3 or more of them, and just realized that I had this collection of stories that all had some connection to the city in which I live, and the city in which I really learned how to write and got to be a writer. And my graduate school advisor was a big fan of short fiction and a big fan of linked collections. whether it was linked characters or linked settings. He actually has a collection of fiction all around a piece of music. He has another collection around the shooting of the Archbishop, which started World War One. And so I thought, well, I think I have a collection around San Diego. So I wrote a few more stories, wrote a novella. And the novella actually was sort of intentionally takes the reader through San Diego, literally. A woman comes to San Diego for various reasons, and she's looking for somebody. So she actually does go through different neighborhoods. There was some intentionality in that story. Oh, I mean, I hope it is a good story. But there was some intentionality to take people downtown and to take people to different neighborhoods that I like. But the others, may have typically have less of a link to the city. Some have very little. Some have more. But all of them have some link. Right?
When did you realize that you might have enough here for a collection? Was there a point where like, oh wow, I think this is it? Did you have like an aha moment, or was it just kind of over time you kind of like, oh yeah, this could work?
More the second, yeah. I don't have I sent it to my publisher, Cowboy Jamboree. I got the contract in January of 23, so that means I sent it sometime, I think sometime in the fall of 22. I think I put it together sometime in 2022. But yeah, it really was that, okay, I do have enough stories here. About half of them had been published, so that made me feel like, there's some value to some of these. Other people have seen something in them.
What was that experience like getting it published for you? How did you go about making this happen?
I know I had sent it to a couple different places that rejected it. Cowboy Jamboree, their tagline is gritlit, which I don't really think of myself as a gritlit writer. But with this collection, and it's sort of in the synopsis that I've written, one of my goals is to show that when I moved to San Diego, which has been 25 years, San Diego sounded very exotic and almost tropical, right? I mean, coming from an East Coast perspective.
Yeah, my palm trees. It's right? Very like idyllic to me. It's like, just relaxing.
Right.
And
there's SeaWorld, and there's a zoo and the beach, and everybody must be happy, and the sun is shining all the time, and the weather's perfect. And some of those things are sort of true. But it's also a city, right, where people experience joy and experience pain and heartache, and that not every life is lived at the beach, under a palm tree, right? People have to work.
Yeah.
So one of my goals is to show, the human side of our city, right? And just as all literature should do, I guess. And so I guess that makes it gritty. Anyway, I had a story called The Flag that I loved, and it was my most rejected story. It was rejected, I think, 35 times.
Wow.
And for some reason, I did not want to revise it because I was happy with it. It was either too dumb to revise it or too stubborn. And it is actually about seeing a Confederate flag on my way to a hockey game about 6 miles from my house. And that was in the Trump era. And, I'm not naive, but it was still fairly shocking. We think of ourselves as pretty liberal here, and I get that I live in a bubble, but seeing that flag, so I wrote a story about that, and finally it was published in Cowboy Jamboree's magazine. The only stipulation on sending them a manuscript is that they published a story of yours. So I reached out to the publisher, Adam Van Winkle, great person, said, hey, after that story ran, I said, I have a collection, and that story is part of a collection. I don't know if I'm really gritlit. He said, well, you won't know unless you send it. So I sent it. And again, I want to say it was maybe September, October. And some point in January of 2023, his acceptance email was like, I dig this, let's do it. To which I said, if you are, it's a podcast, I can say whatever I want, right? If you're fucking with me, this is not funny. You're dealing with a writer's hard here. And, a couple emails later, there was a contract in there. So he obviously was not.
That's great.
Yeah. So it fell in, right?
Yeah.
And just that stubbornness with that one story, right? Like any normal human probably would have either given up or tried to revise it, or, but I was happy with it the way it was.
Yeah, I don't know if that's good advice for our listeners here. Is like, don't revise, like just stick with your gut. But it worked out with you, so you never know. If you believe in something, I guess that is also a good lesson. It's like, hey, maybe keep going until you find someone that does.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's difficult with us because, I mean, I think I would assume most of the stuff that we get is specifically written either for us or because, I mean, there's just not a lot of baseball places out there. So that's a little bit more difficult, I think. But no, I think that there is something to that. I do hope that, and I actually do know that a lot of people end up getting. I think we, in fact, I think we rejected one of your pieces that you ended up getting published elsewhere. Is that? I think that's right. Yeah. See,
one or two actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So hey,
which is fine, right? I mean, that's how it goes, right? And and that also goes to say, I think there were two, as a matter of fact, and other people will publish baseball stuff, right?
Yeah.
I mean, certainly not at the level that we do, but.
I like to think we're the best, but
that goes right. If it's a good story, right? Then,
sure. That is very true. And again, that also kind of speaks to the ability for a piece to work beyond the baseball world. It's like, all right, this is a fiction piece. It is not a baseball piece,
right?
And that's great. And I'm also glad that you didn't hold it against us for for rejecting you either. But you do have a book tour coming up, which sounds fantastic.
Sounds terrifying and amazing. Yeah. So my launch will be here in San Diego, September 21. My mom is flying from Philadelphia, which is very sweet. I got family from LA. I've got friends from the Barrio, and then hopefully a lot of local friends and colleagues. And there's launch is going to be at a bookstore, which is 4 blocks from my house.
Perfect.
And they run a monthly, it's called Dime Stories, reading series. So I've been promoting it there with fellow writers. So that'll hopefully be very big. But then I am reading in a number of places, all thanks to writer friends, including our esteemed poetry editor, Matthew Johnson. I'll be reading with him in Greensboro in January. And then he has linked me with a bookstore in Cleveland. Another friend has got a couple of gigs for us in Chicago. I'll be in Albuquerque, Philly. I think I just worked out something in LA. I haven't heard back yet. So I am beyond thrilled.
Yeah. I'll be at the Philly one. If anyone listening wants to come out and hang out with half the Twin Bill editors, we will be there in Philly. We'd love to see you. And we'll see if I can get you in New York one too.
A fun neighborhood in Philadelphia.
That'd be great.
Street. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Well, I'll see if I can get something for you in New York too. I think that'd be great. We'd love to have you up here.
Yeah, sure.
Are you telling your students about the book?
Well, on the first day of class, I always have a part where I say, just ask me whatever you want to ask me, not about math or the syllabus, but and it's funny because they're very shy, right? And then someone will say like, well, do you have kids? Or, where'd you go to college? Or what do you like to do? And then I'll bring up writing. And then I kind of get that like, you write? You're a math teacher. What do you And so then the last couple of semesters I've let out, I have a book coming. As a math teacher, a lot of what I do is just break down their anxiety. So the more I can be just a human, right?
You got to add the book to the syllabus, I think is what, make it.
If you buy the book, you're already at a B.
That was Francois Bereaud. His book, San Diego Stories, is out September 21st. Coming on to close us out, we have Alex J. Barrio, reading from his short story, Foul Ball, from our latest issue.
Foul Ball by Alex J. Barrio. Can you take her, please? My husband Matt says as he hands over 6-year-old Sienna like she's a sack of rotten potatoes, his arms outstretched with his fingers under her armpits. I told you not to carry her in. I set her down in the middle of the circle we form in the stadium concourse near the stairwell to our seats. She squeezes my leg, her tiny hands pinching my thigh. She hates crowds. We cannot get to our seats fast enough. Concessions selling overpriced hot dogs, tacos, popcorn, every snack food imaginable, plus liquor and beer, line the walls around us. Men with coolers at their feet, beers and canned mixed drinks displayed on the floor scream, "Cold beer here!" Senior citizens shuffle past us, programs and pencils in their hands to track the box score like they've probably been doing for a half century. A couple walks past, the man excitedly repeating behind-the-scenes player drama he heard in a podcast. I used to love going to baseball games. White Sox games with my dad used to be one of the great joys of my life. I loved the suspense behind every pitch, soaring like a droplet of moisture in a thick fog of hope, reminding fans that no matter what had happened up to this point, the losing team could come back with a few lucky swings. When I first met my husband Matt and discovered this tall, brown-eyed dreamboat was also a fan of Chicago's real team, I knew I had found the one. When we had kids, first Mabel and 2 years later Sienna, I imagined them going to games with Matt just like I did with my dad, creating cherished memories that would shape them forever, juggling too many delicious snacks while we navigated the crowd to our upper deck seats, tossing Cracker Jack at each other's mouths, and wishing with every swing of the bat that a foul ball would come our way. Our love of the game deepened our love for each other. I was sure Matt would be the same with our girls. How wrong I was.
We talk to people in and around baseball literature every week on the podcast and publish around 50 writers every year in the Twin Bill Literary Journal. You can support us on Patreon. Until next time,